with Ronnie Cowan, please.
Thanks very much, Chair. I listened to your answers there, and I was waiting for one of you to mention the WASPI campaign. Neither of you did, and you I appreciate the work you've done within the department to make it a better department, to make it more professional, to make it a better place to work. All good stuff. But ultimately, the Ombudsman will be judged by how it handles its casework. Because people come to you sometimes at the very last resort in very desperate situations. There are hundreds of thousands of women waiting for their pension. It's not a new case. It must have been in your desk from day one. It's been around for over 7 years, and they're no further forward. I'm really quite disappointed that it's not one of your priorities going forward.
Shall I answer that one? Thank you. It's a really important point, and I'm glad that you raised it, and I want to be able to talk about it. And before I say anything, I'd like to agree with what you've said. This is a very important case for us, but mostly it's important for the many thousands of women who have been impacted by it. It's been going on for a long time. They've been impacted by what originally happened, and they have been impacted by the amount of time it has taken for this investigation to take place, and I am deeply and profoundly aware of that. And as you say, it's been on my desk since I took over the role 3 months ago. It has been a very challenging case for us. I think it's probably true that for all the people who are currently at PHSO, it's probably the most challenging that we've handled for a number of reasons. And one of the impacts of our legislation, our framework, is that we are obliged to investigate in private. And because of that, we have not been able at any point to discuss in public the substantive findings that we are making or any details in the investigation. I would, however, like to take a bit of your time this morning to talk not about the actual findings and the evidence that we've looked at, but about the process and the reasons why it has taken as long as it has, because I think it is important for this committee to understand that, and also for the many thousands of women to understand that as well. We started looking at this case in 2018, and at that point we were receiving large numbers of complainants. We stopped accepting new complainants after a couple of years. At that point, I think we'd received over 500. We identified 6 that we saw as being representative across the entirety of the cohort of complainants, but we kept a record of the entirety of the complainant cohort so that we were able to communicate with them going forward. In the entirety of the time since then, about 2 years of time has been lost to matters outside our control. That's a total of 2 judicial reviews, and it's also the result of a number of occasions when we have sought views or evidence from all parties to the investigation, and they have asked for an extension of the timetable, and we have happily agreed to it because that was the right thing to do, but inevitably these things cause delays. During the time that we have been investigating this case, we have analysed over 650 pieces of evidence. Nearly 400 of those were at stage 1 of the organisation, stage 1 of the investigation when we were looking at maladministration. Stage 2 we were looking at injustice, and stage 3 we were looking at potential remedy, and that involved another 250 items of evidence. That included white papers, legislation, government fact sheets, government correspondence, television campaigns, research publications, media and others. And in every instance we had to gather that evidence, we had to evaluate it, and we had to consider its impact. Specifically, and most recently, you'll be aware that in March we were proposing to publish the findings from stage 2 and stage 3 of that investigation. And we have always looked at how we can possibly move this investigation forward as quickly as possible, and we combined the last 2 stages in order to be able to do that when a judicial review challenge was brought by WASPI because of concerns that we hadn't fully explained how we'd analysed dates applied to the investigation, which could vary the impact and possibly the remedy. We reflected on the concerns that were raised. A consent order was agreed on, which wasn't actually approved until May. We got the order itself several weeks later. At the end of June, we received 22 further pieces of evidence from the DWP. It was important for us to reflect on these. We sought expert external legal advice. Everything all the way through this organisation has received consideration at chief executive level, and that was really important. And we do believe that the approach that we've taken to that judicial review was the right one. It actually will take less time to get the right outcome than it would have had we allowed that litigation to pursue and to continue. We're now at a stage that we are intending to share with all the parties our provisional views on the investigation by the end of next week. After that, we will provide a time frame for those parties to come back to us with their comments on our findings. And once we've had time to consider those and make any amendments we think are necessary, we will then be able to publish the final report.
Could I just interrupt there? At the end of next week, is that done on the basis of it being in confidence?
It will be at that point in confidence and private to the parties, yes. But it will become a matter of public record once we've received their comments and we are able to publish the final report, which will be, I'm assuming, in the new year at some point.
Is there a length of time that you're setting for that in confidence period?
I believe that we are seeking comments before Christmas. Maybe December the 21st is in my mind, but that sort of length of time. And we are deliberately giving more time than we normally would because we understand the importance of the matter.
So this meeting, confidential meeting, who's that going to be with?
Sorry, it's not a meeting. What we will do, as I say, before the end of next week, we will provide our provisional views on the injustice caused by the maladministration and on our views.
To whom?
To both parties, to the DWP and to the complainants. And they will have that in writing.
Is it six complainants whose cases you took on?
It will also go to the other complainants as well.
So 500?
Yeah, well, all of them, yes.
Well, you said you'd taken on 6 cases out of 500. And one of my concerns is the 494. Are they being kept up to date, even though it's not specifically their case which has been examined?
They have been kept up to date in terms of the progress of the investigation, and we will share the provisional views with them. By, I believe I'm right in saying that the majority have asked for that to happen by post.
So within a week, let's say 10 days, all 500 cases would expect to receive written notification from you.
That's right.
Telling you this is the stage we're at.
That's right.
Indicating what will be in report 2 and report 3, which will get published at the same time.
What they will see is essentially a draft of stage 2 and stage 3.
Yeah.
And we will be seeking their views on that draft in order for us to be able to take into account those views and then issue the final report. As I say, it will be in the new year.
Could I make a point here, Mr. Cowan? One of the difficulties that we have is under the law we are required to investigate in private. So we can't comment when somebody leaks the provisional view which we've sent round. And so it looks as though we're not caring or not responding, but actually what we're doing is abiding by the process which is set out in law that we have to investigate in private.
No, I'm just trying to make sure that the women whose cases you've actually investigated are being kept up to date. The public discourse is a completely different thing, and I appreciate that. But as long as those women have been up to date, do you believe that up until now, and we're talking about 7 years here, during which time maybe 250,000 women have died who would have benefited from their pension, do you believe that the WASPI women have received good service from the Ombudsman?
I think it has been incredibly important that we get this right. As I've said before,
it's not, of course it's important, that's not my question. Do you believe they've received a good service?
I think it was important that we looked at every piece of evidence carefully. and that has inevitably taken its time. I'm not here to say we've done a perfect job. I think it's really important when we've finished to be able to take a step back and go through a real lessons learned approach to ensure...
It's one of your KPIs to provide a good service. I'm simply asking, do you think you provided, have you met that KPI?
I do believe that we have taken the time that we needed to give the appropriate handling and consideration to all those pieces of evidence in an incredibly difficult and challenging case. I'm open to believing, once I've gone through the lessons learned, that we could have done things differently. And at that stage, I'm very happy to come back to the committee and discuss what we could and should have done differently. And I hope that will be something that we build into how we handle cases going forward as a learning organisation.
Right up at the front, in their first report, the PHSO found the Department for Work and Pensions failed to publicise the changes to women affected, which to me was a green light to go. Those women were not properly informed of what was going to happen to their pensions. All these years later, we're still in a situation where nothing's moved on. What is a reasonable date where these women will know the outcome of this inquiry and will know if they're getting compensation?
Well, as I said earlier, a good chunk of the time that we've been looking at this case has encountered delays out of our control. And we would, of course, have published our findings in March had it not been for the latest judicial review. We have taken at the time that we needed to consider the evidence that we were presented with, and I think it was incredibly important in a very challenging case that we did that properly.
Question this point, what sort of timescale are we working towards here? It's been 7 years. What sort of timescale are we looking to bring an end to this so as the women know their outcome?
So, as I said, we will be providing those provisional views by the end of next week.
It's not in our hands, Mr. Cowan, to be able to be definitive about what the end date is going to be. Because if there is further litigation, then that will delay the process even further. That is out of our hands.
You previously said as soon as you can, and as soon as become very elastic.
I don't think it's elastic for us, because we're going to be able to provide those provisional views by the end of next week, and I completely understand how challenging this is for the women in question, and that's why we have done our absolute best to get those provisional views out by the end of next week. We're expecting comments. We will ask for comments back before Christmas. The extent to which it goes on beyond that, as Rob says, is not actually in our control.
Thank you. And I